Hi, I'm Angélique Roché, and welcome to a very special edition of Marvel Live. Today, I'm going to be talking with comic book writer, author, and executive producer Joe Hill about his latest project for AMC. We're also going to be chatting with Joe about his career and his work, and also about NOS4A2, his best selling novel, now TV show in its second season on AMC. And also, Joe is an executive producer on the series. And tonight is actually a very special night for Joe and for the series and, for all of the fans. Season 2 premieres at 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central, and it'll be simulcast across AMC and BBC America. But before we get started and before I welcome Joe on to the show, we have a little sneak peek of Season 2 of Nosferatu.
Vic!
I've made a lot of terrible mistakes in my life, and shacking up with you was just not one of them.
Mom, who's Charlie Makes?
What'd you just say?
Charlie Makes. He's on the TV.
Charlie Banks died today in his prison hospital bed.
I'm the one who's supposed to kill him. Your towel said so, Maggie.
My tiles said you'd find him.
I didn't finish the job.
Wait.
Wayne!
Mr. Banks, you're awake.
Get the gas, B. And to load up the wraith.
Hello, young lady.
There's a cost for everything.
I'm just trying to protect my son.
He knows where we are, Vic.
I'm gonna kill him once and for all.
It's time for you to close your eyes and dream of
Christmas land.
Oh my God, that was amazing. And now I am sitting here with you, Joe Hill, executive producer, but also creator of this amazing world of knives and thought and creatives and Christmas land. Uh, for those who are new to the show, can you give us a quick breakdown of season 1 and what did this trailer mean? Where are we going in season 2?
Right, sure. Thanks for having me on. This is great. So season 1 introduced the two lead characters in this horror drama. So on the one hand, you have Vic McQueen, a young working class kid who discovers that she has a unique supernatural gift. She can get out on a dirt bike and ride through the woods and go, if there's something she wants to find, a lost credit card, a missing ring, she can go out in the woods thinking about it. And she always finds her way to this old covered bridge that sort of only exists in her mind. And when she drives across it, she can find whatever is missing. But before long, she finds herself opposed by a horrible old man with a supernatural gift of his own. This fella is Charlie Manx, who drives a Rolls Royce. He's a kind of spiritual vampire.
We got to this point where it seems like some things are resolved.
Yes.
Charlie Manx is arrested. Bing is on the run. Vic she's split. You just figure out where she's going. Based on this trailer, it seems like there's some new things at play. Perhaps there's a new knife at play.
Right.
What can fans expect tonight with the show's season 2 premiere?
Vic is a person dealing with a lot of trauma, and she's aware of how magnificently powerful Charlie Manx is. And when she learns that he's died in prison, she has a hard time accepting it, and she's right to. Death is Charlie's way of escaping from prison. In a lot of ways, I feel like season 1 is like the first Terminator picture, and season 2 is almost like Terminator 2. it runs a lot harder. It's a much more aggressive season. It's the volume on the sense of menace has been turned up to 11. We know who the characters are, and we know how badly they want to wipe each other out. And so there's no reason not to just start from 100 miles an hour with the two of them going at it with each other. And Vic, at the end of season 1, Vic lost the dirt bike, the childhood dirt bike that made it possible for her to employ her supernatural powers. And these things are called knives. Vic's best friend in the world and mentor, Maggie Lee, a librarian, has a knife of her own, and she taught her about knives. Maggie has a Scrabble bag, and it's bottomless. And when she can ask the universe a question and then reach into it, plunge her hand into it, and pull out a pile of letters and get the answer to whatever question she needs resolved. So there are these other characters with knives. When we meet Vic, she is without hers, but that doesn't last. She discovers a new ride to reignite her power, and she's going to need it. Because before you know it, Charlie Max is up to his old tricks, and he has reactivated Bing Partridge, who is Renfield to Charlie's Dracula. And that's not all. As it turns out, the world is full of unsavory people with powers like Charlie and Vic. And some of them come into play as well. Which is probably the biggest departure from the book, but something I'm really excited about and actually urged. Because a TV show is an enormous canvas. It's a huge canvas. And it's possible... it's possible to jump into odd corners and explore other lives in a way I couldn't quite in the novel.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting because you tease that a little bit. It's teased a little bit in season 1 that there are others, right?
Yeah.
You meet a couple of others with powers, and there's this bar scene where clearly it's reflected that, right? And
yeah.
That being said, this is obviously something you're very much looking forward to for fans to get their chance to see and see it developed and really fleshed out. Is there anything else that you're really looking forward to fans watching this season of the show?
So when I was writing the book, there was a character named Lou Carmody, who is I kind of love Lou. He's this big, sweet, generous guy who has a stormtrooper costume in his closet and goes to geeky conventions. And Lou falls for Vic hard. We met him at the end of season 1, and Vic gave Lou a chance to be something he never in his wildest dreams imagined he could be, which is a hero. For one day he made a stand and was a hero and stood beside her. And she's sort of given this, given him this tremendous sense of self-worth. And he's also just a really steady guy. They have a kid together. He is a steady father, and it was great. It's great to see him all over season 2 because he's a big part of the book, but we only got a taste of him in the first season.
Yeah, and from the trailer, there's going to be a lot of Lou. Lou is very near and dear to my heart. I feel like Lou is all of us. And that moment where we've given the chance to live our comic book dreams, where it's like suddenly now I'm in it. I'm in the thing that I love so much. And I think it's so interesting how you've talked about this just a little bit, but for you've written comic books, you've written short stories, you've written novels, and you've written for TV. What do you think have been the differences between all of those mediums and how you've been able to kind of make the stories come to life?
So I was a comic book writer before I was a novelist. I was a failed novelist when I became a comic book writer. I had written 4 novels that I was never able to sell, and I'd actually gotten to a point where I thought maybe I didn't have a novel in me, that I took my best swing and struck out. But I had written some short stories that weren't too bad. And I had written a short story that had won a prize and gotten a best of collection, a story called 20th Century Ghosts. And at that time, Marvel had a talent scout who was pulling in writers who did short stories and poetry and plays. And she read my short story, 20th Century Ghost. And on the basis of that, let me write a Spider-Man story. And so my sort of big break professionally was writing an 11-page story about Spider-Man fans. It was kind of the story. It appeared in Spider-Man Unlimited #8, and it was kind of like what if there was a TV show like Jackass where ordinary people tried to recreate the feats of the world's greatest superheroes, and disaster always ensues because you just shouldn't. And so that was kind of my big break. And I remember actually having a thing where I thought, I thought I didn't get to be a novelist. I didn't get to make it as a novelist. But maybe I can make it as a comic book writer. And there's this old saying that enough is as good as a feast. I grew up on comic books. I love comic books, and the writers who inspired me the most were all these British invasion guys like Neil Gaiman and Alan Moore and Grant Morrison. My childhood crush was Kitty Pryde from Claremont and Burns X-Men, and I just felt like I could be pretty happy as a full-time comic book writer. Then it turned out I did have a novel in me after all. I wound up writing a book called Heart-Shaped Box that did sell, and I had a collection of short stories, and a lot of other stuff happened for me. But to me, writing comics is sort of like, that's my sweet spot. That's where I feel most emotionally, psychologically, and creatively comfortable, and sort of secure in myself. I don't know, you get something, there's a little bit of something in every form. I feel like when I write comic books, it reminds me the value of pacing, and then I can take the pacing of a comic book and bring that into a novel. When I'm working on a novel, I remember about like how satisfying deep characterizations are, and sometimes I think I could bring that into the comics and make characters, find ways to make characters hopefully somewhat rich. So each form helps build the skills for a different form.
And I love that because you also kind of like go into how the process changes, right? Like there's all of these different outlets, and I think there's strengths and weaknesses to all of them. But I think it is also very clear, you writing a Spider-Man comic about fans really is near and dear to your heart because you are a huge comic book fan. Like you
Absolutely.
are a huge Spider-Man fan. You know, you know, we were kind of talking a little bit before, we started doing the interview that, that, yes, such a
I'm
good
wearing
shirt.
my Bring on the Bad Guys shirt right now.
Such a good shirt. But you were talking about how your dad used to actually read you comic books as a kid.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean, I
absolutely.
hate to ask the obvious question, but do you feel like that had an influence on how you now see the world of writing, but also like what brings you joy in writing?
Yeah, huge. Absolutely. I've always thought I had a comic book imagination, and I come by it very naturally. My first stories, my childhood fairy tales, all starred, characters from the imagination of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and John Buscema, and you know, I went through a phase in my early 20s when I was trying really hard to write the kind of stories that appear in the New Yorker. Stuff like John Cheever and John Updike and Joyce Carol Oates, writers I love. I mean, I think those writers are great. The problem is that I was no good at none of those stories that I wrote. The New Yorker stories I tried to write were any good. And I think the thing is I didn't read the New Yorker. I didn't really care about the New Yorker. In my free time, I was reading, screwed up horror comics mostly. I was reading Tomb of Dracula, which I think was written by Roy Thomas and had the great art of Gene Colan, who always drew this kind of beautiful horror noir stuff. The writers, the voices that I had in my head were voices like Claremont and Gaiman, and that was kind of what recharged me. So it's not a real surprise that I found my way into both genre fiction and writing for comics.
Which is pretty amazing. And I did not miss the fact that almost the very beginning of season 1, there was a choice to have an ad in the back of a comic book that Bing is
Yes.
answering. And I'm like, okay, here we go. This is
Yes.
how this is how the ball starts rolling very quickly, and all the things go bad. All of them go
Charlie
wrong from
Manx.
here.
Charlie Manx uses comic books to recruit some of his servants. That's correct, and that is right out of Creepshow. Yeah, good spot.
Perfection. Um, Speaking of some comics, you have participated in a lot of comics. You've written a lot of comics for Marvel.
Yeah,
You had a chance to participate in the collaborative ensemble cast of Marvel creators in 2019's Marvel
Marvel
Comics
1000.
number 1000. And you created such a very interesting, such a very innovative, and I just, it's so out of the box that I'm like, okay, all right. Doctor Strange
Well,
needs to do laundry. I get it. It
like we
happens.
do. Yep.
Like everyone does. But for you, how was it working alongside some of Marvel's best creators of today? Like, what was it like being able to play with some of your, well, you chose Doctor Strange, but like
Right.
there's so many of your favorite characters in this book.
Well, there were a couple of really exciting things about getting to do Marvel 1000. One was getting to work with Mike Allred, who was the artist on my Doctor Strange, my Doctor Strange story. He is one of the best artists of his generation with such a distinctive style, and I jumped right into it just to have a chance to work with him. So my idea basically looks at Doctor Strange's cloak as having the personality of a cat, and that trying to wash it must be kind of like trying to give your cat a bath. And that's kind of a tip of the hat to two of my friends. I'm very close with buddies with Scott Derrickson and C. Robert Cargill. Derrickson directed the Doctor Strange film, and Cargill was the screenwriter on it. They are both great storytellers. Scott has made some really distinctive horror films and superhero stories. Cargill's written some great science fiction and horror. Both of them collaborated together on a terrific horror film called Sinister. And I felt that I was really writing about their version of Doctor Strange, with the cloak having its own personality, which was the thing that was in the movie. And so it was kind of great. It was kind of like getting to play catch with some of my favorite creators and some of my favorite characters. That said, if I was going to do Doctor Strange, as a long-running comic, I sort of did my Marvel 1000 story a little bit as a joke, and I think I'd have to work on digging into who he is. I feel like he's a lifelong New York guy, and he's kind of avant-garde. So he probably you'd want to write a little bit like, what if Lou Reed had magical powers? He's got to kind of have a little bit of a, and I can totally see Doctor Strange going to parties in the 70s with like, Andy Warhol and Lou Reed and who wrote The Executioners? And Norman Mailer. Norman Mailer would be there. Doesn't it seem like that's the kind of, he's a Greenwich Village guy? I mean, it seems like that's the kind of life he'd be living.
He's just a quiet guy,
Yeah.
but he always around all the right people.
Yeah, totally. He's a city guy.
I like it. So obviously you've written a lot about so many different characters. You've obviously done Spider-Man. You've done your own kind of work. But I hear there is a very special project that you've mentioned before that I am so very curious about. Um, you did a baby Hulk pitch to Marvel, and I want to know all the things.
So after I had done my Spider-Man Unlimited story, I was thinking, God, I got to do more of this. This is so much fun, and so I wound up pitching Marvel on a few different ideas. And one of the things is I was a new father at that time, and I had a little 2-year-old. And I guess I didn't realize, like in TV shows and movies, like little kids are so cute and adorable. And what they don't tell you is they have enormous tempers. They can get in really ugly moods. And like the 2-year-old would like pick up a Tonka truck and be like, ah, and throw a Tonka truck across the room. And I remember thinking, what if it was a real truck? and so that developed into this pitch for Baby Hulk, which would be like a 2-year-old that can Hulk out, and essentially every time he has a tantrum over something, he would not just, he would turn into, he'd be big, but he'd be little. He'd be big for a toddler. And of course he'd be green, and he could like pick the whole swing set out of the ground and chuck it across the playground. I just thought, at first I thought that's really funny. And then, like all my really funny ideas, the more I thought about it, the more I thought, ooh, that's potentially very tragic. It has a kind of, in a way, it's kind of like the kids in Christmas Land. Too much power, not enough experience.
Oh, also, I can't wait to see what happens to these kids at Christmas Land. And I know that folks are, ooh, please.
Well, I was just going to say, as Stan Lee once said, with great power comes a great game of scissors for the drifter.
I feel like that was that
I'm pretty sure that's an exact quote. You can Google it. I'm pretty sure that's exactly what Stan said.
I think Millie Manx would agree with you
Yep.
wholeheartedly. I don't know if a lot of the drifters would at all agree that that's the way anything should end up. But I'm so looking forward to this season 2 premiere. I know folks are, I don't want to say dying because we just talked about season 2 drifters, but here we are. So thank you so much for being with me here today and for answering all of my various questions about what's coming up without spoiling a thing. That was masterful. It's like you've done this before.
Well, this was a blast. Thanks so much. And folks, do check out NOS4A2 tonight on AMC or BBC America. I'll tell you what, it's like Christmas came early.
For those of you watching at home, season 2 premieres tonight. The very first of 10 episodes are going to be premiering at 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central, and will be simulcast across AMC and BBC America. I'm Angélique Roché. Thanks so much for watching Marvel Live.